Everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Title, the CXO Journey. And I'm your host for today. And I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with someone here who is just not transforming the education in India, but she is fundamentally reimagining how children learn to think and they are not told what to think. So please welcome Henna Khan, the founder and CEO of Universe Simplified Foundation. And so a little bit about this organization before we talk a bit more about Henna. So USF, I have had the pleasure of interning once at USF, wherein I personally learned a lot. So USF is essentially a STEM-based education providing platform where they teach the underprivileged schools at different government schools or different villages about how they can think innovatively, how they can apply all of these practical applications to real life and build amazing things. I have had the pleasure to see this firsthand, and I've also known Henna for quite some time. And what struck me, I've watched her interviews. What struck me the most was the story she mentions in the interviews. We'll definitely hear it from her again in detail, but it was around how her interest sparked in this field, how she was always inclined towards astronomy, and one day she picked up a book long after that interest had faded away, and it again sparked that interest into her. So without me talking more about you, I would like to hand it over to you. And it's a perfect, I would say, day to do this podcast because it's Teachers Day as well. So a very happy Teachers Day to you and Eid Mubarak.
Thank you so much, Rishabh. Thank you so much for having me here. It's so amazing to have someone who's interned with us and see your growth as well and your journey as well. So thank you for having me over here.
Before I talk more about you, right, I would want to hear from you about yourself. And you can start from anywhere you like, right? From your childhood, you can start from your USF days or anywhere you like.
So, Rishabh, I think I'll just go for the slightly longer version and start from my early days so that it also blends into why USF was started. So, I mean, when I was, I think, born with the love for astronomy, there was no specific moment that I remember that something happened and I was like, oh, wow, what are the stars and stuff. It was just always there while growing up. And it was a very big part of me, like the curiosity, knowing that the universe is expanding. I wanted to like catch random people and tell them about it. It was just so mind-boggling for me. And I remember, my parents would get me all these books and everything. And not just astronomy, right? Like science in general was one of my favorite subjects. And I remember asking in school, like, what'll happen if we cut open my hand? What's
Mhm.
inside? Or things with evolution. Like the first time I read about evolution, I was like, oh my God, like where have we come from? And I went to my parents and said that if evolution is true, then what the Adam and Eve story doesn't really fit into that. So at the age of like very early age in my like I'm talking about like when I was 6 years old or 7 years old, and I
Okay.
was asking these questions, and when I was like 11 and 12, and a lot of times when I was asking these questions, because my teachers or parents wouldn't know, I would never get an answer, right? And it would just be like, you know what, we'll look at this later, or don't ask this. Or I remember specific instances where I didn't get my questions answered, and eventually it just sort of dropped, like that curiosity part. I was so curious as this really curious kid, and then that I could just feel the curiosity just dropping off. And literally, by the time I was in seventh grade, eighth grade, I don't recollect even asking questions. It was literally like, okay, you have been told, do this much. You have to pass an exam. So, isko ratta maro, exam pass karo, and that's it. And that became my life. And I think in a lot of ways, because I stopped asking questions, I also stopped figuring out myself and what I wanted to do. किसने बोल दिया कि engineering बहुत अच्छी चीज है करने के लिए दिया MBA करना चाहिए तो MBA कर दिया and it was like this typical life that I was leading, which was whatever the society expected of me and whatever the society told me to do, I was doing that. And it was only many years later, and as you mentioned, right, like the book that I'd picked up, but I was working at my dad's business. It was a textile manufacturing plant, and I was trying really hard, but I was not getting interested in textiles. It was not really my thing. But that aside, I was still working in the family business, and there was this book, Cosmos by Carl Sagan, which I had picked up, which I'd bought like 10 years prior to that time. See, लेके उसको रख दिया था. And by chance, I had some time on my hands and I picked up that book. And oh my God, like that entire childhood passion that was dormant for so long. I think it was dormant for like 15, 20 years or more than that. And it just came back with like all of the, as a spring action हो तो एकदम ऐसा वापस आ गया, the whole passion that I had for astronomy and science. And I again started reading about astronomy and knowing all the facts and talking to people about it. And I think at that point, there were two things happening side by side, right? Like one was I definitely want to live a life that I feel passionate about something. And I was getting to sense that textile was not my thing. So one, I was already like sort of thinking, what kind of a life do I want to live? Do I still continue to do what society wants me to do? Or do I, at this point, ask myself what I want to do and then live a life according to that? And the answer was very simple. Like I want to live my life doing astronomy and science and something that really ignites me and I'm really passionate about. And the other thing was, I felt like if this happened to me, to a child who was so curious, then, and you know what, like I figured out that this is still happening because of the way the education system is designed currently, right? So many kids, they have this natural born curiosity, magar kyunki wo सवाल पूछने का atmosphere नहीं है या they are not getting answers, that curiosity is literally very systematically, I would say, sort of being curbed, so that you don't have a society which can ask good questions and make decisions based on what they want. I mean, this is my take on it. It could be incorrect, but and I think that, so these were some of the seeds why I felt like it's important to start something like USF, where you can provide an atmosphere to students, an environment where they can, where education doesn't mean कि रट्टा मारो exam pass करना है, but it's actually engaging, it's fun for them, they are able to ask questions, they're able to try things, experiment, fail, and all of that, right? Like, how do you think that became sort of like the premise of how USF, but that so if you're asking about my journey, I have worked with an engineering firm. I'm an IT engineer, computer engineer, so I've done an IT role for a couple of years. As I mentioned, I've worked with my dad's company. So it was just at the age of 30 where I actually figured out what I wanted to do, and USF sort of started coming into the picture.
That's an amazing story, and I have known a bit of it, and it always, when you tell me it, it's always inspiring to know that okay, yes, you are someone who has whatever you have thought in childhood, it is something that you're doing as of today, and a lot of people are not able to do that. So, firstly, hats off to you for that, and
I think it's an absolute privilege that I can do this, frankly.
that's very humble of you to say. Yes. So before we delve into the second half of your life, right? For the first part, where let's go back to your school days, where Henna was curious about what astronomy is, how do stars shine, a lot of other questions, right? Where did this curiosity, do you think, came from? Was it always naturally coming to you? Was it an individual who inspired you to think this way? What was the instance? What is the story behind
And I've thought about this question, right? Like, did something happen? But frankly, I think I was just born with that curious mind. No one in my family at that time was into astronomy or remotely had something. My mama did, but in a way like I mean, I don't think that was the inspiration. Like, we connected because we both loved astronomy, but no one else in my family. And after my family realized, my parents realized that I'm interested in, they got me books and all, which further ignited that curiosity. But yeah, there was no one instant. I don't know how. I think I was just born with it somehow.
So when you were growing up, right? Have you always been in Mumbai, or was it different cities that you have experienced? How was your childhood overall?
Right. Grew up in Bombay, born and grew up in Bombay. I did go to Pune after my engineering for a couple of years to work in an IT firm. After that, I did my MBA from Singapore
Hmm.
and came back. Then again, I've been in Bombay. But the past 5 years, I have lived in a village as well on the outskirts of Bombay, but that's for USF. So more or less the base has been in Bombay.
And you mentioned that engineering was something that just because it's the ideal, I would say not the ideal, probably the most choose path. That's why you also had started off with it. But did engineering play a role in sort of pushing that innovative thinking mindset that you have?
I hated engineering the 6 years that I was in it. But and I've done diploma 3 years directly after 10th, and I've done like 3 years of B after diploma. So it's 6 years.
Mhm.
Said that, I think engineering because you are doing something which is difficult. And like even diploma was like बहुत rote learning based था, बहुत simple था, मतलब ऐसा ये इतना करके जाओ वो आप पास हो जाओगे exams, and मैंने ऐसा बहुत light भी लिया था. And when I came into like the bachelor's of engineering, you could no longer do ratta maro, right? Like there you had to think. If you don't know a concept, you don't know it. Like you're not going to get a question that replicate this. So I think that really helped with my thinking for sure. And you also learn how to do hard things. So in retrospect, I think it was great that I did end up doing engineering. But if you ask me, I might have chosen a very different path if I had. I might have done something purely different if I was again given a choice as to what I wanted to do. Said that, frankly, Rishabh, I don't think the engineering also or the work environment also in India is designed so much for people to think. I feel like what I learned in the first 10 years of my work also was I learned more in 2 years of USF than what I'd learned. So you're somewhere still put inside boxes and told to think within this box. So yeah.
Agreed. So let me put it this way as well. So you mentioned that engineering was not your first choice and you would have done something else if it weren't for engineering, right? Uh, before we delve into what that was, when you were young, when you were in your school days, what was everyone has this thought, right? It's never based on some backstory or something. It's purely based on what interests you. That okay, for example, I as a young individual back in my school days used to think that pilot banunga, I'll become a pilot, right? But that never transitioned into anything when once I grew up. There was nothing that I did it towards that direction. There must have been something that you wanted to become. Was it were you sure that you wanted to do something like you're doing at USF, or was it something else altogether?
No, I frankly I'm telling you, like school days में I think मेरा उतना वो thinking था ही नहीं कि मुझे बड़े होके क्या करना है. It would, even if I had some thought, it was very parroted version of doctor, teacher, blah blah blah. It was not like, oh wow, I want to do this. But one thing I know for sure is that since my father is an entrepreneur, I never thought in terms of what job I would do. I always thought in terms of what I would start. So, but I think it's because of the environment that I was in, and both my parents would work for the organization that they set up. So I think somewhere, so if I would ask that question, it would be like, okay, what will I do? Like, what will I start? So maybe that is a little bit aligned to USF, but
That's interesting. So in a way, you would say that your parents shaped your mindset towards entrepreneurship. It may not be in the same
yeah,
field or the domain as they are
yes,
working in.
sure. I
Amazing.
just always saw them doing their own thing. So I'm like a very much like my father. So I don't know, somehow I think you can say that somewhere I was in that environment and I just felt like, oh wow, it's so exciting to start something of your own, and maybe something that I always wanted to do.
Okay. And what would you have done instead of engineering after your diploma program?
I think I would have done something purely in science. Like even today, I mean, of course, we are in education and stuff, but I can't do pure science outreach because I'm not from a science background. So I might have done something like pure physics or something, and taken some path which would be like a pure science path. I think I might have done that. I was always very interested in science,
Interesting.
physics, biology, all
Okay.
of that.
And throughout your entire journey, right? There's always individuals who we meet who sort of inspire us to get into a specific direction, to work in a specific direction, right? Who has your inspiration been since, let's say, your childhood or at any point in your life?
Inspiration has been my father. He is the most hardworking person I've ever met in my entire life. And he came from a very, very, very humble background, like from having days where there was no food to eat. And like at the age of 9 or 10, he was, he would, before going to school, he would wake up at 4, go to Crawford Market, buy bananas, go to door, sell that, come set up a tea stall, sell that, and then go to school. Like he's from that journey, he set up his own business. But I've seen the integrity, the hard work, and there's, things that we always used to tell us, okay, there's no substitute for hard work. And we were raised in an environment where, like, even when I was working, I was taking the bus. I would wait for the bus for an hour or something and then only go by bus. Like rickshaw mein baithne ke liye, oh my God, how do you spend money in rickshaw? Like he raised us in a way that he used to always say, "कि पैसा है तो ठीक है, but पैसा नहीं है तो भी you should be able to live your life well." And so I appreciate some of the values that were imbibed while I was growing up. And I think that's played a very important role in shaping who I am today. The other one is definitely Carl Sagan was my very big inspiration. That book Cosmos just transformed my life to such a huge extent. I can't tell you. I'm still so inspired by him. So yeah, I think I would say these two are like my top big inspirations in my journey.
That's amazing. And we'll again delve back into more knowing about your father and how he shaped you into being such an amazing entrepreneur and probably also somewhere inspiring you to start USF. But before we delve into that story, you mentioned the book by Carl Sagan and you also mentioned that it was another massive, what do you say, canon event or a pivotal point that inspired you to start USF. So can you walk us through those months or years of decision making that you had initially, right? Because while starting off, you might have always been unsure about how things will pan out, how this will go at all. So a bit about that.
Um, It was a very long journey, Rishabh, of repeatedly asking myself what I want to do, right? I read the book and all of the passion came back, and that didn't immediately translate into USF ko shuru kar dete. It was not like that. I think I took anywhere between like 1 or 2 years to really be able to set up USF or really be sure of what I wanted to do. One is just asking, what kind of a life do you want to live? So I started asking myself one question, that if I had 6 months to live, how would I want to live those 6 months? So automatically, when you ask yourself that question, a lot of things fall away, right? Like, and each time I ask, and I love traveling, I'm a rural backpacker. So for me, astronomy, traveling, all of those things were like top there. And then I think it was a natural progression to say that if this is how I lived the last 6 months of my life, why should I not live my entire life that way? But it was a very long process of really asking. I was also excited about wildlife, environment. So I used to sit and make these long lists. So there was no like eureka moment that, oh wow, let's do this in life, now I have some clarity. It was a process that I followed of repeatedly asking myself, what kind of life do I want to live? What is my passion? So it was not like and I was lucky, right? I was very fortunate that I was passionate about multiple things. But I would make these lists and everything. And then I think you start honing down that question. And eventually then it was like astronomy and science sort of won over travel.
Mm-hmm.
And once you have asked that question enough times, you end up getting clarity. Okay, this is how I want to live my life. And once you had that clarity, I think at least for me, there was no going back. So
Got it.
then I was like, now, no matter what. And there was also enough ridicule that astronomy, like, are you serious? That's a hobby. Like, how are you going to make a career out of it? Or like, like there were also people who really encouraged my, my dad was not very happy about, because I was working at a family business, and since it would mean that I would leave the family business, he was not very happy about it. And it took him a while. Like I think it was 5 years after I started USF that one day it just like hit him that, oh my gosh, he's still doing this. And that's when he flipped and he was like, but my parents are like the absolute sweetheart. So it was never like causing a hindrance for me, but he was not very happy. And he couldn't understand, why don't you want to make money? Like USF was not a money making thing ever. It still is not. So since he came from a background where there was so much hardships because of lack of money, he could not grapple with that idea. But
Mm-hmm.
my mom from the beginning was like, your life and like, what is it that you want to do? And like full support. There were these two very close friends who are still very close friends with me. And I think they were like my big pillars, because initial journey of an entrepreneur is so difficult and it can be quite lonely. And, there were so many ups and there were downs. And in that down, I think the biggest enemy of an entrepreneur is self-doubt. And at that time, my friends and everyone like just boosted me up and they stuck through me and they told me, no, this is, and even though it was not a very great idea looking back, I don't know, it was a very simple idea, but they were like, no, no, this is great. And I think somewhere because of all of these people, I was able to then bring USF to a point where we were like, okay, we can make this work. But it took time. And also the person that I'd worked with initially, Mr. Anuj Bhagwati, at AT Enterprise when I was working in the engineering firm, he was the director there, and he was also very, very supportive. So even when in the idea stage, you were like, you know what, we will support you even financially for this program. So I feel like so many people supported, and that's how it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and when I was saying it is a privilege that I can follow my heart, is a lot of people cannot because of also a lot of other responsibilities that they might have. But at that time, I didn't have any responsibilities, and I could really take this step and say that, you know what, I'm going to do I'm going to explore what I want to do. So that's how we finally started.
That's amazing. I mean, you started off by giving everyone who's watching this podcast a framework on how they can probably start thinking about what they want to do. That is, assume that you have, let's say, 6 months to live, right? How would you live your life then? What would you do? So
Yeah.
amazing advice. And you mentioned that you face these hardships, right? And definitely self-doubt is one of the biggest, I would say, blockers for someone who has tried. I myself had once tried to build something and scale up, but didn't work out the way I'd hoped. But whatever you're doing is obviously inspiring. And you mentioned that your father has always been your inspiration. But when you were building USF, right? Let's say the initial 2 years of it, the first 2 years of it, how did you sort of navigate those 2 years? And was it always, let's say, backed by some investor who was going to help you build USF? Or was it initially just you figuring things out? When did you have a co-founder to help you out with different things? How was that?
Yeah. Great question, Rishabh. So initially, when the idea had come, and Meera was there from like I think she was one of the first persons that I floated the idea to, and she was in college at that
Mhm.
time, and she just jumped on the bandwagon. She was like, "Yes, it sounds like a great idea," and she just jumped into it. And she had sort of like, if it wasn't for her, possibly USA would not have happened. I don't think I could have done it alone. Like she was the heart and soul and the rock of USF. The initial years were very difficult. I remember like it was just me and Mira trying to figure things out. We would go to schools and doing a bunch of things. She was in college, so she was also studying and stuff. And at that time, we there was no scope. मतलब ऐसा कुछ भी thought भी नहीं था कि non-profit करना है क्या. It was just ये idea है. बच्चों को curiosity वो सब होना चाहिए. Let's do this. And we
Mhm.
were going to private schools and all of that. A lot of the funding at that point came from my personal funds. मेरा bank balance so बहुत ही fast. It came to a point where I had to start borrowing money from my father. And as I mentioned before, the way we have been raised, it's like we have to be independent and we have to, you know, have certain values and stuff. So for me, borrowing money from my father was like, and it was never anything that they implied. Like they were like very supportive of everything. But for me to have to be borrowing money from someone was really bothering me. And we had to keep doing going to these private schools repeatedly to make money and then put that again into USF, and you know it had become this cycle. And we were doing sort of outreach work also at that point with municipal schools or with you know students who cannot afford otherwise, but we couldn't do too much of that because then we also had to make money out of keeping USF alive, right? So during this time while we were doing a lot of outreach, I got a good opportunity with a US based firm to do like an online virtual. It was a virtual work. It was related to outreach kind of thing. But then suddenly you're getting paid in dollars. So that was a great opportunity. I took that up. I sort of then became the funder for USF. Meera wanted a job. Her college was over, so then we sort of could give her a job at USF kind of thing. You know, like she could be on a salary and stuff. So thoda fir usme thoda organization jaisa. And frankly, we didn't have a conversation. I think the minute that funding problem was solved, we just did it absolutely 100% pivoted to doing stuff for students who cannot afford it. Looking back, I think it was so natural choice, such a natural choice for us that it didn't even occur us to have a conversation about it. We were like, तो वो जो बार-बार प्राइवेट और वर्कशॉप्स लो और वो उसमें से पैसा बना वो पूरा निकल गया, you know, so that's how it happened. And then but then it was getting again very difficult. I'm doing that US job as well, which was quite a number of hours. And then USF was also there, and my heart was in USF. So I saved up money from earning from there. And then in 2016, September is when I decided to completely sort of stop that US based work. And this time I had enough money saved up so that I could take like a sabbatical kind of thing and just focus on USF and setting that up. I did so. Then September 2016 is when I completely stopped the US work, company's work, and jumped back full time into USF. And at that time, we also then had the support of multiple people, like Anutsa coming and saying that we have funds, take this fund, don't not take a salary and things like that. Because then again, the same cycle would have happened where my bank balance would have gone zero. So But that time, I think we had some credibility because we had been doing this outreach work for like a year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever time that had passed. 2 years, I think. So the first 2 years, I think we had built enough credibility for people to then say, and then we won some fellowships with Wipro Foundation and Unlimited India, and that then ended up giving us a boost. So I think आने के लिए I think बहुत hardships, but फिर एक बार then once I finally decided कि no, this is now what we want to do, then that's where the actual journey I think sort of took off. Meera was always there. So she was the one who actually designed the curriculum and assessments and all of that at USF. So we were both initially very much on the ground. What an amazing journey, but it had been like so much fun, so much exhilaration. Even today, I'm so much excited about work happening at USF, but the initial days were like something else. Just, and it's all project making, right? So you're making projects, you're failing, you're trying out something. It was just crazy fun. The whole initial stuff was amazing fun.
Definitely. I mean, I am just recalling those days back in 2018 when I had the chance to work with you guys,
Yeah.
going into those
That was
schools.
right when we had
Yeah.
started, Rishabh. That was, you all were one of our first interns, and even the training and all of that was like just
Yes,
designed.
that
Really
was
quick back then.
that was so amazing. I remember the training part, which wherein we were taught how to approach things, how you can think innovatively before we
Yeah.
tried to work with students. Right.
Yeah.
Amazing, amazing journey. So we talked about the USF initial days and how your journey has shaped you so far. Before we delve into much details further, you always have had this command over speaking, which I personally observed in your interviews as well while we met you as well. So whatever you're saying, you put it in a way that people are listening and they're able to grasp. Is what I felt, right? So I just wanted to know whether uh, this fluency of putting your ideas out, was it naturally coming to you always, or was it something you worked towards? How has that been for
Actually, this is an area that I struggle with if I have to write. I find it very difficult to articulate. I think if you are asking me about, see, USF is something I'm very passionate about and it's coming from the heart. So I'm not
you?
really having to think. So I'm happy it's coming across as able to articulate well, but it's nothing much that I have to do because this is what I feel and I'm able to talk. But I think that because of the way my education has been, I have definitely struggled with articulation or being able to put my thoughts. I don't know if I've consciously made efforts, but definitely reading about Carl Sagan had sort of put in a lot of clarity in my mind regarding a lot of things. And I think my thinking journey sort of started over there. And I do love thinking just as a natural, like in my day, I need thinking time. I cannot always be just constantly doing something and just loading my brain with more and more information. And so I think that having that peace and calm and thinking time maybe allows me to articulate or have thought through things a little better. But it's a very conscious part of the way I live my life.
Okay, that's amazing. So on the same lines, right? You have definitely developed qualities like leadership or whatever it may be. It may be resilience to ensure that USF is going in the right direction. It is always continuously growing, right? So what has been your leadership style while shaping up USF, and how has that itself shaped into what it is today?
So I think the resilience part and the grit part comes because you're so passionate about something and because like if you have a child, you don't need grit or something. The child is not well, you don't need the parent is going to do everything that it takes to make the child okay. It's like that. So I think for with yourself it's like that. And I'm consciously trying to not think of it as my child and step away so that, it's not a very healthy way to think about an organization. But that part comes from there. Everything else, Rishabh, has been learned. I have been a terrible leader. I had no idea how to hire people. I mean, other than the passion, I think I had to learn every single bit about starting an organization and doing stuff myself. Not understanding how to have conversations, like open conversations with your team members, being more authoritative, because I felt so passionately, it was so difficult for me to delegate in the initial years. So I've made like the worst mistakes ever. Like otherwise, all the mistakes we say I've made them. But and the initial years were fine, and Meera complimented me very well. Like I think that all the things that I was not doing well, Meera was doing them so well. So somewhere, we balanced each other out. She balanced me out. And the initial years are very we were a very small team, Rishabh, because we always knew we wanted to focus first on the program and get the foundation right, rather than just gathering a lot of people and growing up too quickly. I think we were always of that mindset of quality first. That's a mindset that I've learned even from my father and just the way I am. That no compromise on the quality ever. So we have always grown very slowly. Said that, after COVID, we had 4 years on the ground, where me and Meera were on the ground, making the curriculum, designing it, refining it, and we had come to the stage where we felt that now we should scale up, because you also want to see the replicability of a program, right? And we scaled up. Now, when I'm saying scaled up, means हम लोग 350 students के साथ काम कर रहे थे during COVID or before COVID, and then we directly moved to 1,500. Now, that jump, and from like a 5-member team you jump to a 15-member team, and we had funding, so we just jumped. And in hindsight we should have done it slower, but theek hai, wo hua, and then we took the next 3-4 years to stabilize. But I immediately realized that my leadership skills were not suited. वो 5-member team में चल जाता है, because you know everyone so well, and you're going to everyone's house, and it's very different kind of atmosphere for a small team. But the minute you have like a 15-20-member team, so I used to come back from work every day and read books on leadership. I would do courses on leadership. I had to really build my leadership skills ground up. Um, and I think now they're like, I did a lot of courses and stuff now, which I don't remember, but multiple things I've done, where slowly I started to understand, okay, you know what, this aspect, I can do it like this, which is better. Like, so instead of like, how do you even learn to delegate work? You get out of certain spaces to allow other people to take those places. A lot of things were learned. One book that I have taken it up as my Bible for leadership at USF is Good to Great. Have you read that book?
No, I haven't, but I'll definitely after this.
It's like, आपको कुछ चीज बनाना है और आपको उसके लिए रेसिपी मिल गई है, and now
Yeah.
all you have to do is follow that recipe. I've
Mm-hmm.
read that book almost like maybe 5 times, but every time I finish that book I start over from the beginning, and every time I learn something new about what the leadership style at USF should be. So from me not being able to delegate, coming to right now where none of my team members can come to me with a problem without solutions, and they know
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to give a solution. If they're coming to me, they already have to have thought of 2 3 different ways in which they can solve the problem, and then we will discuss, and we'll understand what is the criteria for the decision making and how they're going to make those decisions. So my entire leadership team has to think like an entrepreneur today. There's
Mm-hmm.
zero culture of micromanagement. We have a culture of very high ownership. If we feel like the ownership is not 100%, unfortunately, some people we have had to ask to leave. But no one, like everyone knows exactly what they're accountable for and what their goals are, but किसी को manage नहीं करता है किसी को भी to say कि अरे यार ये काम क्यों नहीं हुआ. So very flipped way of the work culture, constantly building capacity. So we focus a lot on capacity building, whether it's decision making. So everything, like instead of me telling someone कि ये ऐसा हो सकता है, I'll ask them, how do you think this can be done? Then if it is something, then like there are times when you co-create documents, and then when they are creating something, you're observing and giving feedback, and that's when it gets transferred to that person. So even for our facilitators at USF, there's nothing like training ho gaya, abhi aap ground pe jao aur kaam karo. There's constant capacity building in terms of, okay, now what is your capacity for doing this, and continuous skill building happens at USF for the team, for the facilitators, for everyone. So all of those things, but how do you hire someone? Make the difficult choice of asking someone to leave. And we have a non-negotiable on culture. And people कभी कभी ऐसा लगता है कि ये लोग ना पागल हो गए, like ये लोग को कुछ काम कराना है और culture के नाम पे ये सब थोप रहे. But actually it's funny how like we have such non-negotiables. If it is a capacity in terms of skill, we are okay. And we'll say
Mm-hmm.
that we'll help you build that skill. So every single individual at USF has their own capacity building plan, which is personalized. You want to learn this, okay, how is the team going to support you to learn this, and what is the status in next 3 months? So there's this massive focus. But if it comes to something like an attitude issue, then unfortunately it comes to us sort of having to ask those people to leave. So there are certain non-negotiables, but if you read the book Good to Great, you'll understand what is the culture at USA. We are not there yet at all. It will take
Mm-hmm.
us years to reach to a stage of what is being said in the book of where you should be or how you should function. but very conscious, very high focus on quality. That's a complete non-negotiable, and certain value-related things which are non-negotiables. But that's how we function. But everything is learned now. Like, मेरे में कुछ skills नहीं.
An amazing insight you gave me just now, that in the typical founder centric culture, say you move towards a shared decision making culture, and you don't compromise on how you have defined your culture to be, right? It's not, an attitude is not something that will fly just because someone is good at a certain skill, and the reverse is true as well. Definitely. Amazing insight. And throughout this entire journey, right, you might have obviously picked up a lot of skills which are good, and there are always skills, or I would say traits, that become something like you'd want to change. So what are those traits that you have picked up but you feel that, oh, this is something I need to change within my leadership style or within in general?
Right. I don't know if they're traits that I picked up. I think because I was constantly learning and trying to be better at leadership, I think the ones that I've picked up are the ones that are the better skills. The traits which I would still want to change are the ones which are inherent in me, which I was born with, and it's my personality. It's a core of me, and it's very difficult to change them. For the longest time, like I had to really build myself to be open to other ideas. Sometimes I'm like, oh, मुझे दिख रहा है ये बहुत अच्छा idea है, मेरे को ये करना है. And I can sometimes be a little close to other people's ideas and suggestions, and that is something that I've worked very hard, and I think I might become much better now. That if someone is saying something, I'll first listen rather than shutting it down. But it's a very learned skill. Like I had to spend years learning how to do that. Some things that are still, so I'm a highly results oriented person. I need things done, and I can get very impatient if they're not being done. So I'm not someone who can just have a lot of long conversations without something happening. So even in the early years, we were prototyping constantly. It was never like, हाँ हम लोग अभी 6 महीना लेंगे प्लान बनाने के लिए और फिर ये प्लान के हिसाब से कुछ execute होगा. We were like on the ground doing something, what's working, what's failing, and then you reiterate over and over again. So that's how I think, and me and Meera were both very quick decision makers. So I think those are certain things that we had to change over the years where, okay, now there are more people, you just don't make a decision, you listen to everyone. But I still do struggle with the lack of patience and my high results orientation. Though they have worked very well in getting certain things done, and but also they can be detrimental. I don't consider myself very highly on the people's part. I think as my nature, I'm a more practical person, and I can have conversations, and I love my team, and I love working towards their growth, and all of that is great. But then I've gotten team members who balance out in that area. So I've gotten my second line of leadership is more of people's person. So there are certain areas where I've identified, okay, maybe I'm not so good, but my team members go, so that I move out and they move into those spaces. That's how we are functioning.
Okay, that's amazing. And so throughout this entire journey, right, you have definitely, as more often than not, founders have this up and downs and how you're navigating things, right? So there might have been a time where it wasn't, it might have not felt like just a setback or something that you have faced. It might have felt कि अरे अब इससे आगे क्या? How do I navigate this at all, right? What was that point, and how did you manage to navigate through it?
My God, I think how do I have answers for everything that you're asking? This is such a typical journey that I've had. But yeah, so as I mentioned, Meera had joined us when she was in college, and she just been with us for the longest time, right? And she also wanted to explore certain other areas of her life. She was interested in wildlife, and she wanted to do this, and I think to a huge extent, she also just wanted to take a break from just work, right? Like she just wanted to because she's been working for the longest time, and she just wanted to take a small break and then figure out what she wanted to do next in life. And I had never seen USF without Meera in it. Like I could not imagine USF, the one which did not have Meera. And I was like, oh my God, this is something now that I can't overcome. Like how will USF ever function? At that time also, because Meera was doing the entire curriculum and program, and because the team had blown up, so I had to do more of fundraising and stuff. So there were certain things that she had this core expertise in. And of course, she was sweet enough. Like she gave us a year and a half to plan the whole transition and all of that. But I think the advisory board of USF really stepped in at that time. I remember the first time I went, I was so stressed up, and I'm telling them that Meera is going to leave after a year and a half, and they just laughed at me. And because like I was so stressed and I had this face, कि अभी क्या होगा, अभी तो मतलब the दुनिया खत्म होने वाली है types, and they just laughed at me. They're like, it doesn't happen like that. Like organizations function even when people change. And I think that really, I think that their support and helping me, and I'm sure I did a ton of courses now, which I can't remember, but certain courses which help you with actually putting your second line in place, hiring new people, building their capacity, and that entire transition. And actually, when Meera left, the transition was so smooth. My goodness, it was like one of the smoothest things ever. But वो इतना tension लिया था पहले. But I think that stress sometimes helps you in taking action and putting certain things in place. So it all
Mhm.
happened well, but that was, I feel like, one of the more challenging parts of USF. I was also a little bit struggling with my health at that time, and I think that contributed a lot. And this is something that I will tell all of, and I think this is again something that all entrepreneurs go, because you are such a workaholic, you really ignore your health, but it
Mhm.
catches up with you at some point. So I think then I've also made some changes in my life where then I have been focusing, giving priority to my health and all of those things. So, but that particular period I think was pretty challenging in terms of all of these things. But yeah, I think it's important to have a strong board who believes in your cause. So like Nikun sir, Anuj sir, you're not always being able to zoom out and think. So you need those people who are outside USF but really aligned with USF and who are supporting you and guiding you through your journey. You need mentors at
Mhm.
every stage. They helped us through the challenges.
Okay, that's amazing. And in one of your interviews, you had mentioned that at this point you are also considering having a deputy CEO who is going to help you manage things and ensure how you roll things out smoothly. So how did you arrive at this decision? Because usually one thing I've observed is, and I've been guilty of it as well, is if it's your idea and you're starting off with something, you're always defensive about it. Ki, I want to run things my way. I want to ensure that the CEO tag is always with me. So
Yeah.
how did you overcome that, and what made you decide to go along this?
So I think, like me and Meera have always been on the ground and we have been like totally in it. And I think that Meera decided to leave and the stress that I went through, it made me realize that how dependent we were on her.
Mhm.
And of course, then we got in more people and everything is fine. But now then it got me thinking, how dependent is USF on me? And I think once you start making decisions from point of view of the organization and not yourself, a lot of things will automatically, like you'll start getting the right answers. So if I want USF to be healthy, I have to make myself redundant. And I think the thinking mainly stemmed from there, that no matter what, it should not be कि अगर मुझे 2 महीना break लेना या मैं नहीं, if I'm not well or something and everything comes to a standstill. So I think that was the main reason why I am already looking at a deputy CEO. Also, my role has sort of become like, let's keep USF alive. So, the fundraising part and all of that part. And I started, and me and Meera, we started USF because we were passionate about something on the ground. I'm still, I would love to be on the ground and involved in the curriculum and all of that. So a lot of non-profits में क्या होता है कि founder को ही ये सब चीजें करनी है, funds लेके आना है, ये करना है, वो करना है, but the founder starts becoming very away from the actual program on the ground. But given
Mhm.
our obsession with quality, I felt like if Meera's not going to be on the ground, one of the founders has to be there, because we are the ones who actually understand the vision and what we want to see. And it takes time for the vision to come alive, right? So you can't be like, अभी मैं funds ले आऊंगी and ये हो जाएगा खुद से.
Mhm.
So I think it was again a very conscious decision where I said that one, I don't want USF to be dependent on any one person ever. So it's not just redundancy for me, but we are constantly seeing how to have redundancy for multiple people, multiple big roles in the organization. And the other one was I consciously wanted to move closer to the ground and the work and the vision, in making sure the vision is implemented and all of that, like with the more exciting part of USF. And then bring in, so I've actually gotten, like, there's Akshay, who's a program head right now, who we are looking at as becoming the deputy CEO next year, hopefully. And hopefully at some point in the near future, becoming the CEO. And Jalpa is again someone I've known all my life almost, and she has joined us as the operations head, and now she's doing fundraising and stuff as well. And while these two are filling in these roles, important roles, I am actually getting more bandwidth to work on the curriculum with the team, because there is this gap after Meera left. So I'm sort of, coming in from there, like inquiry driven learning. We are putting more every time we are looking at the program and we are improving it. We are putting something else, improving the training or something or assessments. So that's how we are looking at USF and how it's growing. I'm going to stay with USF till I die because it's something that I don't know what I'll do without it. And I don't want to live without it, but I don't like I just don't want that constant CEO tag on my head either. Yeah. And also, Akshay, who's the deputy CEO, is from the community. So I don't know if I mentioned this, but we're actually not working in Bombay. We are working on the outskirts of Bombay, about 2-3 hours from Bombay in a village. And we are working with all of these village children. And Akshay happens to be from the community itself. So for me, in some ways, and almost the entire team belongs to the local community. So for me, in some ways, it's also important that, at some point, USF will become a community-led organization. And that's a very big thing for me. So, yeah. And by the way, if you will read the book Good to Great, it also talks about, reinforces this idea of how the CEO should be planning on at some point stepping out and having the next, because otherwise the CEO leaves or something happens to the CEO and the organization goes stuck. And that's happened in so many good organizations.
Right.
So it should never be dependent on one person.
Interesting viewpoint. Yeah. I'll definitely have to grab that book and give it a read.
Yeah.
But nice. It's been so insightful so far, and I'll also try to delve into a more couple of deep questions, I would say. Let's say reflecting on whatever we have talked about so far and looking back at your entire journey. So if you were to go and talk to the young 6, 7 standard, what would you tell her? Just one advice. What would you tell her?
Learn to think for yourself, like ask questions. Because I think it's not just about education, right? Like it's how you live your life. Are you going to spend the rest of your life doing what other people are going to tell you, or are you going to ask good questions and figure out the kind of life that you want to live? And I know 6th, 7th grade is a little early for that, but just asking questions, just that, just thinking for yourself. I think that's enough.
And let's say if it's someone who is a young professional who are right now not sure what they want to do, but they want to make a big social impact like you are doing, and probably in the education space itself, right? What would be your advice to them?
So I think in some ways I did make a mistake by just directly jumping into USL and starting an organization. I think I should have spent more time understanding the problems on the ground. So if you are inclined, work on the ground with other good organizations, maybe study something in education. Studies are not always great. Sometimes it can also close your mind to certain things. But when I'm saying study means read about education, have your first-hand practical experiences on the ground, spend enough time. Just don't set up something because you feel it's a good idea. It's really difficult as of today to start and run a non-profit. So if you feel like you have to be like really, really into it and really want it. But even for USF, like we actually asked around a lot, is it anyone else who's doing this? Because then USF would not have needed. I could have just joined them. So, like work with other organizations, understand what it is that you are really passionate about, and then think of setting up something of your own or jump into it. And it's not difficult. Like even when I was working, I was always volunteering over the weekend. So it's not like 2 hours per week. Volunteering is a good enough thing to give you a taste of whether you're interested in this or you're passionate about this or not. You can start from there.
Okay, interesting. And I mean, I know you have sort of answered this earlier, just before we talked about what your advice would be, that you would never want to leave USF or even think about doing something else other than USF. But let's say USF didn't exist, right? This wouldn't have happened. What would you have been doing instead? I'm sure it must have been on the similar lines, but what would you have been doing instead?
Actually, Rishabh, I don't know. So the thing is, I also love animals. And in fact, when I was in my college, I was volunteering with a bunch of animal welfare organizations. I had a government card, we could rescue animals and treated dogs on the street and all of that. And I still love animals so much. I think the main reason I could not work with animals ever is because I get so attached and it's so difficult for me to emotionally regulate myself when it comes to animals. But I think if not USF, there's a very high chance that I might have set up something to do with animals. Or the other area is travel. I absolutely love traveling, like really love traveling. And that's another area where, I could have maybe done something with sustainable travel or something like that. Like these are some areas that I feel very passionate about. And if USF by some chance or something, if it had not happened, then maybe these two, 2 other areas where I see myself having done something.
Nice. Okay. Amazing.
And I still want to do
Mhm,
that. So when I say I'm also, I still do want to live a full life. So when I'm saying I will be with USF for the rest of my life. But for the 10 years, I've only done USF in my life, more or less. Like I've had very little of anything else. And even when it comes to family or health or whatever. And now also stepping back as a CEO is also going to give me that time to live a more fuller life. So
mhm,
I am going to get a little bit of the animal work. Maybe I will be traveling more. I do want to spend more time with my family as well. Why I still want to still be with USF in the way that I am. So, but I'm very conscious at every stage. I'm very conscious of the kind of life that I want to live at each stage, and I want to live a very full life at the end. It's a very selfish reason. It's nothing to do with altruism or anything that people think it's very altruistic to have started up USF, but it's not. It's purely to do with how I want to live my life and what I love. So that's
mhm.
what I'm going to do.
Nice. And the way USF has shaped everything and has been shaping everything, it's obviously incredible. And if I were to ask for your view, right, on how do you think Indian education landscape would shape or evolve? First would be how would it evolve is what you think, and the second one would be how would you want it to evolve? So how would you answer?
Rishabh, so I know that the new education policy is coming in and it's talking about critical thinking skills and inquiry-driven
Mhm,
learning, exactly the stuff that we are doing right now. Implementation is going to be a very big challenge. I don't think the question anymore is about how you want it or how it should be or what I want. I think the need of the hour is to have a workforce which can think because of the advancement in AI and the way, like, even if you look at the IT sector, right? I mean, for the longest time, what work has the Indian IT sector been doing? We have been doing work that today AI can easily replace. We have not innovated in the past so many years. We had a service, call centers could replace kar diya. I was an IT engineer. I was doing silly work. You would get this list of 5 things to do today, and I would solve some silly problem. But I never really coded properly. Like I never really had to use my brains. Now, I don't think it's an option anymore for the Indian education system. It needs an absolute overhaul. I have no idea how it will be done because, and I'm not talking about the fancy IB schools and stuff, right? Like, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the majority of the Indian population, which is in rural India or in schools, government schools, which is not having access to facilities. I will say the intention is there. The teachers that we work with are so concerned about their students, but there are a lot of maybe policy level changes that need to be done. But we need the education system to transform now from one which is based on rote learning to one where you have children thinking and engaging and coming up with solutions and solving problems. I don't think it's an option anymore based on irrespective of what I think or not think. It's a need of the hour.
mhm,
And you'll be surprised that when I'm talking to block district education officers or I'm talking
mhm.
to teachers, they are like, this is needed now. It's not even like needed tomorrow. It's needed now. And they get it. So when we have good relations with the government or with the teachers and all, it's because everyone is getting that things have evolved very quickly, but people are understanding that the need to change it is now. So it's not an option anymore.
Amazing. I mean, hopefully it works out the way you have just described it, and eventually it'll have to one way or the another, as you correctly mentioned. Most of the things that India as a country is doing in terms of IT is morely service based. There's no innovation, it's all US or China based. But agreed 100%. And I think we have covered a lot of angles so far about you as an individual, what your thought processes are, how you have shaped USF, how USF has shaped you, and everything around it. So I think one last thing I would want to ask you is, if let's say you had 30 seconds or about a minute to, let's say, all your digital traces, all your memories, everything that you have done so far, put out there in the world has been erased. You just have 30 seconds or about a minute max to give out a message to the world that they'll hear. Everyone in the world will hear it. What would that message
So, I want to tell the world that we are okay in
be?
sense that I know that humans are constantly being bashed around that we can't think long term and we are not, it's because of us that climate change is happening and we are at each other's throats and we are fighting with each other and we are not tolerant of each other anymore and there's so much of hatred. And I want to tell the world that maybe these things are true, but I still think we are doing okay because we have evolved for survival for the longest time. Our brain is still that of a prehistoric ancestor, and the world around us has changed so quickly that humans have hardly had time to grapple with ourselves and understand ourselves. So maybe start with being kind to yourself before you even talk about being kind to each other. But yeah, I think that like stop bashing everyone around, and I think we'll have to. We are all trying to adapt to a very fast changing society, and it's only going to take off from here further. So if we can just like pause, reflect, give ourselves a pat that we are still able to cooperate at the world level. We are still able to. You and me are able to have this conversation today. There are still people who will fight for animals. There are still so much of science that is happening that is helping the poor. Like 100 years back, a king didn't have painkillers, and today we have. And there are a lot of positives in the world as well. And I think if we focus on that and we focus on solving our problems with science and technology, I think that we'll be okay. So maybe that's something that I want to say.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you for that viewpoint. I think
Sure.
I've already taken up a lot of your time and asked you a lot of questions. Anything else you want to add apart from everything that we've talked
Um,
about so far?
No, but I enjoyed this interview so much, Rishabh. It had a different flavor. I love that it was more about like the personal touch and the kind of questions it's about the leadership. So thank you so much for having this. I've done some interviews, but I feel like this was a very heart-based interview. So thank you for that. I really enjoyed it. Great
Thank you
connecting
so
with you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Likewise. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all the insights that you have given us so far. I'm sure a lot of individuals who are thinking about how do they get into the education sector, how do they make that social impact, they'll definitely get a lot from this. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing everything.
My pleasure. Thanks, Rishabh.